Hello, everyone. We're extremely excited to host you for our last event of the year. What started as a journey to engage Indian students at Berkeley in thought-provoking discussion with policymakers, entrepreneurs, artists, journalists, among others, has now become a strong community of future leaders. After having done more than 15 such events already, we're really excited to close this year with one of our favorite speakers. As my friend Divyan Saxena and I sit here in a fresh haircut from Urban Company, we can't possibly underscore its importance in our lives during this pandemic. Be it sanitizing our homes, or repairing our ACs during the scorching summer, or even safe haircuts. It has become an integral part of our lives. And what could be more exciting than interviewing the co-founder of this unicorn, our very own Berkeley class of 2011 alumnus, Raghav Chandra. Just to give a short introduction on Raghav, he graduated from Berkeley in 2011 with a BS in Electrical Engineering and Computer Science. After having worked as a software engineer tutor in the Bay Area, Raghav decided to move back to India to pursue his entrepreneurial ambitions by first starting Buggi, a dynamic peer-to-peer auto-rickshaw ride, and then eventually Urban Company. Raghav, it's a pleasure to have you with us here today. Just feel free to take a minute to introduce yourself, and then we'll continue with the event.
Yeah, thanks for hosting me, folks. You guys have gotten good haircuts, and it's a shame my haircut is pending. But that's on the to-do list. But absolutely a pleasure being here. I probably associate a lot with a lot of audience live here, given I'm an enthusiastic Cal Bear, and I did move back to India in 2013 when I was fairly young. When I was 23 years old, not older than some of you, maybe just by a couple of years. And happy to kind of share through my experiences of college, about working in the Valley, about the shift back, about just being in India. So yeah, let's explore some of these.
All right, great. That's great. Thank you so much, and thank you for the university loyalty. Go Bears! Before we begin, we have some instructions for our virtual audience to bring some order to Zoom madness. While it will be wonderful to virtually see all of you with your cups of coffee reacting to a conversation with your videos on, we request you to please keep your audio muted throughout the conversation. We are sure you have a lot of questions for Raghav through the course of our chat, and we encourage you to send them via chat to one of our members renamed as Send Questions here. And if connection and time permit, we will let you ask the questions yourselves in the later half of the event. Thank you so much. Passing on to Divyansh right now. Oh, I think Divyansh has gone off for a second. We'll just wait. All right. Yes, I think Divyansh's internet is off. Really sorry for that. But I think I'll just straight dive into the questions before Divyansh comes back again. Let's address the elephant in the room, the overarching theme of this event. As someone who studied and worked in the Valley, but built for India, you are no stranger to the intricacies of infrastructure and the kinds of work happening in both the places. A question we like to think about what needs to happen in India for it to be considered an attractive place for people to incubate in a way that attracts talent from the US, China, and Indonesia, for example.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. You'll have different answers to this depending on what each one of us kind of look forward to in working. Personally asking me, I don't think anything needs to change at once. I think the inherent pull for an economy such as India, which is developing, which is in a lot of sense not quite there yet, but you kind of look with the eyes of pushing it through. I think that journey is what really makes India super attractive. So when I moved back, it was for all the things which it could be is what made me really come back. I do think there's just tons of interesting problems to solve. It happens to be the largest country by population, just tons of infrastructure which needs to be built. And I choose to look at all of these as being just fun problems. So being a part of the solution reaching to a place where, it's an opportunity. We get to create a nation or a country in our own way.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the lure, and that lure would continue for some time. If you expect it to be, exactly the same infrastructure as say New York or San Francisco, that probably is not going to be the case. But there are other pleasures as well. There are other pleasures beyond the opportunity which I enjoy. But I think that's the primary reason which at least excited me.
Okay, I guess I'll let Divyansh follow up. He's resolved Wi-Fi issues in Hyderabad and he's back again with us.
Yeah, sorry, I dropped off. Just to probe a little deeper on that. So when we still talk to our friends, they're still sort of hesitant about coming back and would rather stay back in the US, right? Because of prospects of a quote unquote better career. So just to probe a little more, if you were to address them directly, how would you convince them to come back and invest their career in India just like you did? Any piece of starting advice as we go ahead?
So I think the ecosystem is actually fairly well developed. And that was probably true when I was there, and I can totally see those questions coming up because I went through the same questioning. And I think that the ecosystem is very developed across disciplines. Be it tech, be it non-tech, be it business, consulting, any profession. India has equally good opportunities and structured companies to learn from. Right? Being mindful of the fact that it's a different ecosystem and different problems present. I think the place where it becomes particularly exciting is when you want to. It is developing ecosystem, right? So especially the younger companies, the startups, which are trying to push the frontier. I think those are particularly the very interesting opportunities because you're literally getting to create some of the basics from scratch for the, be it education, be it employment, be it healthcare. These are fairly large scale industries, and a lot of work is happening. So if you truly value the urge to create meaningful stuff, right? Then these companies, then the ecosystem becomes right. Companies and startups would be there every place. But I think that's how I look at it. So equally mature ecosystem for the most part. But just by the virtue of it as a nation, as different industries being in a state where there's just so much more room to grow, I think it's a fantastic place to join. I think here's what's evolved or changed in the last 10 years. There's been a sudden push, a sudden jerk, especially when it comes to tech, right? India kind of skipped the desktop era. India jumped straight to the mobile era. So 5 years, 6 years ago, when I moved back, every single person had a smartphone and a data pack. And when I was doing my first startup, Buggi, and I would meet auto-rickshaw drivers, some of them didn't know how to read, but they still had a data-backed smartphone to stream YouTube and enjoy media. Right? And I think that's the depth of how penetrated technology is and data is. And I think it's things like these which become a new channel or a new medium to scale business in a different way, scale business in a way which was just not possible 20 years ago.
So just like following up, because you mentioned the data pack point, 2013, 14 was the time when people in India were only just getting started with apps and the internet as a whole, right? So what was the thinking behind an app that gets you on-demand services? Because it was definitely a very big challenge back then.
Yeah, so we start. So I think all the three founders for Urban Companies, there's me, there's Abhiraj, there's Varun, and all of us happen to be doing this. There's the second company. The first one for us was shorter lived, was our first company, a lot of interesting learnings. But when we went about this, from the idea of what are the biggest problems we can find. Some things were very clear to us. We wanted to do something which could keep us hooked for after 50 years. We didn't have to ask the question, what are we doing with our lives? It was very clear that the problem is just so ever broken that you can dedicate a whole lifetime's work. It was also clear we wanted to do something in tech. We were young folks. We wanted to do things. We were ambitious. We wanted to scale things up. And tech seemed to be a disruptive medium. Not saying that tech was the only way to solve a lot of these, but this was one of the things. But the most important lever was doing something which was meaningful. We wanted to do something which touched daily lives.
Okay.
It was truly a broken problem. It was something which was not a good to have for us. It was something which was required on daily operations for a household or a consumer to go by. And it added a lot of meaning. Right? And when we started doing our research and we were new to Delhi, none of us actually from Delhi. We just happened to be in Delhi. We were in the process of setting up our houses. Abhiraj was getting married. He had to figure out wedding photographers. We had to figure out plumbing, carpenters for a house. And we realized this is actually a pretty bad sector. Right? Like it's such a pain to deal with other people. It's just so much easier to go on an Amazon and buy something. Why do you have to deal with people? Right? And that's when we realized actually, hey, this is just a sector, and it's an extremely broken sector waiting to be solved. And that's when we started thinking about it. And one of those very, very important things which we realized was not only is it very broken as a problem for consumers as a household, it's actually a massively broken problem when it comes to employment as well. You have all these service professionals, and you would hear terms like blue-collared professionals or the gig economy. These professionals don't earn the biggest bank in the offline sector, right? So in India, they would be earning about $300 or 20,000 rupees a month. And we said, what could we do to supercharge the sector, put an infrastructure so that these professionals could stand on their own feet, be independent, live a better life, propel India's employment in our own way. So this was the starting point. And I think using tech, using mobile was an afterthought, not an afterthought, it was how we solved the problem. But for us, what we need to solve was 90% of the juice. How was tech? And I think just the fact that there was mobile and there was internet, and we happened to be there at the right time, right place. We could leverage mobile, we could leverage internet to solve for simple things, right? So tech allows us to run a lot of processes which would otherwise have required people, right? So that's what prompted us to make it all tech. And I think I remember a day, there were days when for the first time we would introduce internet and mobile to a lot of our professionals. So we would literally, like first set of 100 to 200 professionals, we would literally buy them phones because they'd never done business using mobile. But those days are gone past. The whole industry now operates on mobile. You don't even have to sell it to them. They're fairly fancy phones. Their phones probably much better than I do.
It's true. One thing is for sure, Abhiraj's wedding, led to great innovations in India. But like just a small follow-up, so recently I was, talking to a few fund managers at Edelweiss, and, they're like fresh graduates from Wharton, etc. And they came back to India during the 2008 crisis. And, they wanted to start a quant fund, but no one in India knew about it. The adoption for quant strategies was so low that they couldn't, raise investors, and they eventually, went to value investing. I think the point I'm trying to make is there's a certain stigma for technological innovations or adoption, for a few years ago, at least when you started Urban Company back in 14, 15. Was going through people explaining them to adopt the app, the users and the service professionals, one of the biggest challenges you came across, and how do you just barge through it
in terms of adoption of just technology?
You're offering, yes, because I think there's also a sign up cost for service professionals to come on Urban Company. So how did go through that barrier of convincing people to use your services?
I think here in this question lies probably one of the most important learnings for setting up a business or kind of creating an enterprise. The real challenge is to actually figure out what are you trying to solve. It's to figure out the problem itself, And now that you have a problem, it's to find the right answer. There'll be thousands of ways to solve a certain problem. You have to find the right answer. And then that answer needs to be such where it's viable to actually set up a profitable business. Right? The adoption part was actually like the question is the third sector, right? So why would consumers use us? Right? The major value add is needs to come in solving their problem, right? So services lack quality, right? So can someone add standardization? Can someone add structure? Can someone figure out the pricing for a plumbing job or a salon job? Can someone ensure a bare minimum bar on quality versus me running around and asking 40 people, hey, who's the best carpenter you have? Right? And I think once you solve this, other things are easier, right? So adoption of tech is a great convenience factor. It's a great lever, right? Everyone's used to tech. So the real challenge is actually not so much of adoption. People actually find it super easy. But it was actually to give a fairly compelling answer to the problems which consumers have. Similarly, on the partner side, partner side was interesting. Partner side required us to push the use of tech because it was not inherent nature. Consumers actually have been used to using technology and apps for a long time, right? So, if you ask my grandmom to use technology, well, that's going to be a challenge, right? That would have been a struggle. But otherwise, most consumers are fairly familiar. And India has a fairly young audience. Most of our consumers are in the 28 to 35 working population, right? Partners, for the largest part, were probably for the first time doing a digital transaction. They might be using it for YouTube or TikTok, but for the first time, they're actually doing a digital transaction. And that took some time. But here's the trick, right? People are willing to even go through learning and picking up technology as long as they see a meaningful value add. And to a partner ecosystem, if we are able to bring much better earnings to them, if we're able to bring in much better social comfort, and maybe we can touch upon this later, where our partners face a very different social dynamic on urban company versus outside, because now they do go to a consumer's house as an equal and not as a feudal master slave construct. Right? This value add is just so high that our earliest partners were more than happy to invest 5,000, 10,000 rupees in buying themselves phones, which otherwise they would never have bought.
Wow.
I mean, phone is a small thing. Partners go out and buy themselves scooters and cars because it's just easier for them to travel to consumers' houses and do more business. So phone and internet adoption is a fairly small adoption curve for most of them.
Okay. Yeah, I think Divyansh wants to follow this.
Yeah, that's actually super interesting because we were before this call we were actually talking about how the new sort of economy, right? Is that so? The new thing is that new age entrepreneurs are no longer driven by, you could say, wealth creation, but instead they're more focused on let's say value addition, right? So how do you think you went about this? How do you think you went about this particular trade-off when you were starting? And sort of like tangential to that is, how did you convince yourself that urban company is exactly what I want to do, and how did you put your all into it? So it's sort of a two-part answer, but yeah.
Divyansh, you'll have to repeat the first part, the trade-off part. I missed that.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay. So I think so something that we were talking about before this call is that in this new startup economy, new age entrepreneurs are no longer driven by, let's say, wealth creation, but instead they're more focused on value addition. How did you sort of balance this trade-off when you were starting up initially? That was the first part of the question.
Got it. No, absolutely. I think it fundamentally should always be that way. Entrepreneurs should chase value creation and not wealth creation. It's a chicken egg problem, and there's a it's actually not a chicken egg problem. There's always one thing always comes first, and the other thing is always derived from it. And I don't know if that sounds very philosophical, but the answer is very clear, right? If you want to build a business, someone needs to pay you, right? People are not going to pay you just because you want their money. People are going to pay you because you're going to do them a service, because you're creating a good, manufacturing something, you're a doctor, you're a service professional. So you need to create value, and people will barter using currency in our world, right? And that's how you generate revenues. I think fundamentally that should always be the case. So it's not actually very hard from a very first principles thought process that value creation needs to happen before wealth creation. I think people, in general, I think the highlights and what we talk about is often pegged. I think we talk a lot about success stories in measured by valuations and measured by funding rounds. That's unfortunate, I would say. I think that sells more. But I can tell you as an entrepreneur, it's quite the opposite. In fact, every time you raise a fund, it's a loan you're taking. It's not something to, beyond a point, it's not something to celebrate, because you're basically taking on a shit ton of responsibility, and you have to give payoffs to the investors who've been so kind enough to trust in your vision. Right? I think that's in some spectrum where we started off. I think in our professional careers before we started Urban Company, we'd kind of see the absolute heights of our careers. My other two co-founders went to BCG. They went to both IIT Kanpur, consulting, MBA. I was enjoying myself in the Valley, right? So I think the wealth creation bug was not as prominent, because we'd kind of seen it. We didn't necessarily benchmark our success based on how much we earned in the short term. We were fine. I mean, I moved back to India, so there's a massive step down in apples to apples comparison. But here's the interesting part about value creation. If you understand that value comes first, you actually do get to create massive wealth, either for yourself or for the company in the future. Because if you're able to create a lot of value, that translates very directly to wealth. A lot of companies often fail because they switch this trade-off. For a lot of people, my personal advice, if you guys are all in college, personal advice is flip that trade-off. The short-term lure of wealth or salary or any of this is just actually really, really short-term. If you kind of think about your next 30 years and think about wealth creation, right? There you'll realize to really, really make it big, you also need to do things which are really, really big. Money will just not pour down. So, that was a perspective which helped. And it did take me one company building exercise to realize value creation is absolute paramount. Everything else is secondary.
Yeah. I think the first thing that that came to my mind when you spoke about success and failure is that these definitions are so fluid and it all comes from your background, right? We go to Berkeley, and we have like a safety net, right? That a lot of other people probably don't, right? But I think something that is like the biggest equalizer is how much we learn from our failures. Right. And I think this is probably the best time to talk about your first company, right? Buggi, right? Buggi didn't, it didn't take off. Right. And so I want to ask, how important do you think, an entrepreneurial failure in the form of Buggi was to your journey? Because, I think there's two sides. A Silicon Valley mantra is fail fast and fail cheap. But so many people in the Valley are still so afraid of failing that they don't even take the initial jump to begin with, right? So, what do you think was your biggest sort of learning from the fact that Buggi didn't take off, and how did you apply this to your Urban Company journey?
Yeah, I think the two parts to this. One is just failure, success. And then I'll come to specifically the interesting learnings from Buggi. if I get asked what are the top failures, and it's a very hard question to answer, because I think there are like 90 failures every day and 10 success stories, and that's basically how working life is. Surprise, surprise. Because you basically have a problem. You have tons of problems floating around, right? And you'll choose, okay, let's try to solve these 10 problems. Answers are not evident. It takes a long time to just even figure out and frame the problem well, right? And then you try multiple solutions, and rarely things really hit it out of the park, right? So everything which didn't hit it out of the park is basically one more failure or a learning story, right? So I think in startup building or business building life, you don't want to call it failure, but every single day you're kind of going in and exploring and trying things, and only some of them work, 10% of them work, and all the rest would be termed as failure. So failure is super important. When you start working and building business, it becomes a spectrum. It's very hard to figure out success and failure, because basically failing like 90% of the time. Now, Buggi was an interesting experience. As a 23-year-old, I was all passionate about ideas. Coming from the tech hub, I thought I'm going to change the world. I'm going to build this next level interface on tech. And I was busy when I was ending my Twitter journey. I was building, coding up stuff, and I came back and I was coding some more, and I launched it, and that's it. Nothing happened. Then I realized, okay, great. The idea was very cool, but how do I get customers? Or like, how do I get people to sign up? And then I went through that journey, and I realized, and I scrapped everything I built over like the last 4 months, and all the coolness in tech. And because I realized no one is going to care about using my technology, because what will I tell them? Why do they have to use it? So I created a simple SMS solution for my auto-rickshaw drivers to use. And I didn't even need a website for customers, because I was at zero. I needed like one customer a day. I literally need to knock door to door to get that one customer. And that's the cranking of the engine, right? And through that experience, there was some very interesting learnings. I think that was my business school firsthand, or my consulting experience in a short span, where I realized, before I jump into ideas, I actually first need to define the problem of what am I trying to solve. I need to also figure out how large is the problem. How large is the pool of money people are willing to pay. I learned a few tricks in surveying. Oftentimes you'd ask, hey, Shubham, I have 3 ideas. What do you think of these ideas? I cannot imagine Shubham ever criticizing any of these ideas. But if I ask Shubham to pay for one of them, that's when I get true feedback. So this was a trick I learned. So I think overall, in my first experience, taught me fundamentally the right questions to ask, and be problem first, then idea first. Idea is just a way to solve it.
Right.
And we use this all the time when we create a new category, when we have to launch a new country, when we have to launch a new city. No matter what the idea, that could be a starting point. The first grounding question is, what is the problem? Because only then will someone pay for it once you've solved it. And how large is that problem? And if it's not very large enough, then what's the point?
Right. Well, since you spoke about risk taking in like the former part of your answer, this is something Divyansh and I have discussed extensively. So in some sense, apart from like the minimal existence of incubators, do you think the Indian education system in some part is to be blamed for the non-existence of the risk-taking entrepreneurial spirit in India? Like, what's your take on this? Like, compared like to ecosystem of like, let's say the Bay Area. You can have a contrasting opinion. You might believe like the entrepreneurial risk-taking scenario is there, but just like something we wanted your thoughts on.
Yeah, that's a very deep question. I do that. I don't have a good benchmark, because I have spent different parts of my education in 2 different places. Right. So if I failed a few classes and I got the opportunity to be in 2 different colleges and schools, that would be a true benchmark. I do think the way of education is different in, say, in Berkeley versus most, like, for example, for me, schooling was in India, right? I think there is difference. In fact, there is a massive difference, and it's the same difference which you'll see between Berkeley and other equally well-established colleges. And I think it boils down to this. I don't think, except in Indian education system, we're not taught how to ask questions. You can probably generalize. I've already worked a fair bit of my life, so I can generalize that to just generally education. Education does not teach you to ask questions. Professional life is mostly about asking questions and framing problems. But in education, in Indian system, we are not taught how to ask questions. They're structured, curriculums. You test on them. The question banks are not infinite, so it's known. I think in Berkeley it was different. And it's not just a difference in Indian and, say, the American education system. Berkeley also happens to be public. So there's absolutely zero spoon feeding. You can take that in a good way or a bad way. But what that does force, I think, all students to do is kind of just fight for themselves and figure things out, right? And figuring things out, the first thing is you end up asking tons of questions. And it's just the art of framing questions, asking questions, which I think is super meaningful. And that's what gets most used when you enter professional life. And even in professional life, it gets most used when you're trying to set up a business, because no one's going to tell you where the business opportunity is. No one's going to tell you what you need to solve, because if they had the answer, it would already be solved, right? So I think that's for me. I think that's the core reason. I only wish that education system taught us a lot more on asking and framing questions. In fact, just knowing ourselves, than just figuring out answers to things. Sure. Like experimentation. Through my education, I partly was in a boarding school, and I got to kind of do my IGCSEs, which is British, and my fascination for science actually grew multifold there, because I was just introduced to like tons of experiments at the risk of, say, 20-30% lesser curriculum, which was fine. I don't remember 90% of what I learned in school anyways. Right. So I think just experimenting and exploring things, it just teaches you so much. Right. I think these are the small things which we miss out. In the pursuit of knowledge, we kind of miss out the real education.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I'm sure, like everyone on this, on this call agrees with what you're saying, because, we've all been students at some point in our life. A majority of us still are, will continue to be for the next couple of years. So my next question is a follow-up to your previous answer, right? So I think a common theme that I've picked up is that you keep saying that, that good startup ideas come from finding things that suck and sort of building on them, right? I think what I want to, so this is more like a customer research geeky sort of question. I just want to understand how you go from how you at Urban Company go from 0 to 1 in terms of a product, and what's the behind the scenes on that? How do you launch a product from 0 to 1?
Yeah, I think I wish there was a very good science to it, but there is some structure, and you'll realize I'll be stuck on preaching the same theme of value creation comes first. I think it's such a simple thing, and I think just used well is the answer to 0 to 1. No matter where the starting point is, we somehow very quickly always figure out what is the problem we're trying to solve, right? And we size the problem. You can size the problem just so many ways. You can size the problem in scale, and then you can size the problem in depth, right? So how many users? I want to start a new business, right? I want to start a business on selling the best pizza, right? So first, I want to ask how many people in the place I want to launch want this best pizza. right? And you can do surveys to get good grounding as an entrepreneur, right? And then you'll figure out the depth of it, right? Like how hard is it to get the best pizza, right? Like, is it already there? Is that a problem to solve, right? If there's no problem, if there's opportunity, if there's an industry which is large, great. But in that industry, if there's no problem you can identify, then you can't monetize because you're not adding any differentiation, right? So then we figure out, is there a problem in that industry? And the third step is probably the last step, which is what we'll spend our days solving, is how do we solve this problem? That's a journey. So the 0 to 1 is actually just spent on figuring out 1 and 2. And this is, what a lot of you will start recalling as this term called product market fit. Where
PMF,
market is literally the first 2 points, which is who is the person who's going to be willing to pay, right? And the product is what you spend a lot of time iterating. Actually, building product is a little more intuitive because like it's more intuitive to us to just heads down, put on our thinking hats, and just keep solving. But if you get the market wrong, if you get the problem wrong, it's very hard to figure out once you've kind of soaked into it. So we spend plenty time whenever we want to launch new things, whenever we want to iterate, trying to really go deep into identifying the problem and the scale. Once that is done, then starts the fun journey of building the product and finding the product market fit.
Okay, I'm really sorry, but I'll segue into something on a lighter note. So I think, Raghav, the nation wants to know, why did Urban Clap go from Urban Clap to Urban Company? I'm sure some of our audience might have already read about it or heard about it, but we want to hear from your mouth, like what happened? Like, why was there a change from Urban Clap to Urban Company?
Oh, very simple answer. I think we started off with the pursuit to build a company. So we eventually realized, why not have company in the name? But no, I'm kidding. I think Urban Club is a great name. When we created that name, it brought together 2 things which we kind of liked. One was we wanted to kind of urbanize and bring an urban flavor, a certain professionalism to the art of services. And the clap kind of signified a social, communal angle. It also kind of signified, in an instant. But I think the Urban Company change was more recent, and it happened because we wanted to create sub-brands, and company allows us to, have urban salon, urban massage, urban, handyman. So that's the real reason. But I do kind of like the sound of it being a company now. Finally, we are a company after 6 years.
I think all of us have got used to the name, so it doesn't matter anymore now. But before Divyansh moves into very Berkeley specific fun questions, I just had one last question about your next steps. It's like a multi-part question. So I think first part is one great development in the entrepreneurial ecosystem in India is successful founders reinvesting their money into the ecosystem as angel investors, freeing up a lot of capital for young, ambitious Indians. So when can we expect a similar future move from Raghav Chandra? And I think more explicitly, the second part is what's next for you in the sense your LinkedIn says you are an ARP volunteer. And we briefly discussed this as well. You do keep up to date with all the political developments, and that's something which interests you. So how do you see entrepreneurs in the policy making space, and more specifically, where do you see Raghav Chandra?
Yeah, if only I was rich, folks. I'm enough money to invest in everything. Wow, what a world! The sad truth about entrepreneurs is if you were fairly frugal and pocket light,
right.
and before this call we were joking about it. I like to put all my eggs in one basket, and that basket is Urban Company. So it makes it all the more fun. And I'll do a recall to wealth creation and value creation. So clearly, very less brains given to wealth creation. But jokes aside, I think the business and the startup space is a fairly budding one, and I think that the entrepreneurs who've gone through and made it big, and they actually do help out the industry. And while we guys are not quite there yet, we are more of the eggs in one basket kind of entrepreneurs in Urban Company. We try to do our bit in other ways in helping and mentoring and sharing our learnings. But having said that, it's very important to realize that we actually don't view ourselves at all as experts. We are like, I mean, come on, we're 6 years into business building. Right? There's a long way to go. So while, you hear me sharing and stuff, it would be very foolish for me to say I would be any form or any kind of an expert, or my advice would be so valuable to someone that they build like the best successful business. So I think that's the first.
Hopefully, I can be one.
What was the second question, Shubham, you had?
Next steps in the sense of, I think your LinkedIn mentioning you as an ARP volunteer, and we just like briefly discussing entrepreneurs coming into the policymaking space, and specifically Raghav Chandra. So, like, where do you see yourself?
So I think a lot of folks might be from policy. I think actually working with any government and understanding how it works is just a very fascinating thing. In fact, governments are basically just really large companies, right? And they just have so many people, and how that machinery works is just fascinating to look at. So when I came back to India, I got the opportunity to almost close to intern for a couple of months. Very fascinating. But what I see myself doing after 20 years, just this itself, and hopefully create the largest services marketplace across the globe, scale to 100 million households. Right now we are at like 5, and yeah, like really do something super meaningful.
I'm sure all your dreams and ambitions will be fulfilled, but all the best for that. But yeah, Divyansh, you can go next.
Yeah, so I have one quick question before we jump into a rapid fire of sorts. Our Berkeley version of the rapid fire. So just one quick question before that is, people often talk about wartime versus peacetime CEOs, and COVID-19 has become sort of this watershed moment in any company's strategic decisions. How did Urban Company decide to tackle this? Because I think Urban Company is going to come out of this all the better, right? Because it's just done so well during this really weird time. How did you guys go about this? Just a quick insight into your thought process, whatever you have to share on this, and then we'll jump into the rapid fire.
Yeah, we were the first, or perhaps the first company to call off our office and go fully remote. And this was before India announced lockdowns. India was in the first set of countries to announce complete lockdowns. And boy, we think of India being inefficient, the inefficient elephant. The space with which things got moving to fight against COVID was just amazing. So we kind of pulled through very quickly. And the first thing in our minds was how do you quickly go remote? And that happened in the course of a week, where 1,300 people went from office going to just completely remote, right? Like including desktops and laptops and our call centers and all of that. I think after that started a fairly scary journey for about 6 months. And at least back then, there's some fancy business words for this, business continuity plans, BCP. But basically for us, what was going out was we want to make sure all our stakeholders and responsibilities are well taken care of, right? So it broke for us in terms of, so we have a very large family. The families of our partners, employees are a part of that. They're a smaller part, right? So we have about 25,000 partners, and they're often the sole or the bigger bread earners of their family. So, in extension, it's basically these families who rely on us. And we basically were staring down a barrel where they would not have any work for 2 months. The first thing for us was, how do we make sure they are going to sustain? And we did a bunch of things. We raised funds. We gave them loans, interest-free loans. Take 5,000 rupees, pay us whenever. Our business went to absolutely zero. So we changed all our team members and started giving every partner a call. We also used it as an opportunity to be there for each other and also train our partners. So for 1 month, we were just training and talking and training. We were doing remote classes and stuff. So a lot of partner side work happened to keep that ecosystem energized, because that's a very close family to us, and they drive the business. They're the frontline warriors. Then came employees. So we actually did not, we refrained from layoffs. We refrained from salary cuts. That was the last thing we would have ever touched. Right. And we actually, our business is actually fairly well recovered now, but we made sure those don't happen. And a lot of effort was done to make sure everyone's happy, everyone's safe, everyone understands, everyone is the class monitor in the house, so that their parents don't go out and use the parent stuff of koi baat nahi, it's fine. Right. So we have to do all of this. Working remotely was really, really intense. Everything had to change. Right. So a lot of that happened for our employees. And the third thing was finances. Zero revenues, big costs. We had to really pull back. So a lot of effort went into figuring out office spaces, reducing costs from different areas, being extremely, extremely efficient and lean. Because we knew this was going to be a long, long thing. So, 3 stakeholders managed really well. Major thing was sab kuch theek hai, but people need to be safe and healthy. So for the 6 months, we just focused on health and safety for people. So I think this was it. We still operate remotely. Business is actually fairly well and much better than previous. Some categories have picked up well, but our way of working is just so different. We have massive training set. I don't know if you guys know that, but to deliver a service professional to your house, those professionals need to be trained, and to train them, we actually have a supply chain of training, right? And that training is physical training. You have to see how people are doing, and now it's digital, because thanks to COVID, that kind of accelerated our innovation there. So all of this kind of in the back office had to happen through COVID times.
That was super interesting, because I didn't know, I don't know half of the stuff that you guys were doing, sort of behind the scenes. But now that I do, I'm going to become #1 urban company fanboy, right? I think that's the only thing I can do now. I got a haircut last week. I look great, I think. Okay, so I think we're now going to transition into hopefully a rapid fire set of questions. And it's special because you are a Cal alum, so they're mainly going to be so we have 5 questions. They're going to be fully Berkeley focused. So you can answer in either a word or a sentence, whatever comes to you. So the first question, what is your favorite memory from Berkeley?
Cycling. I used to cycle a lot. I live really far away. After my first year, I was down in Ashby College, which was 2 miles away. And I used to cycle.
Wow.
Okay. That's something we will try out next semester, I guess. Favorite class? If you remember.
There are 2 favorite classes. None of them are related to my major. One was a class on, it was a religious studies class on Hinduism.
I've taken
and then
that.
the other was a philosophy class. Those are my 2 absolute favorite classes.
Okay. It was the one.
I think I hardly attended my CS lectures.
No one does.
I watched them all online and did all my work. I was damn good at my projects.
Every CS major ever. Yeah. Okay. Next. Yeah. Priyan's webcast gang. Yes. Favorite spot on campus?
Ah, wait, I have to think about this. Sorry, this is rapid fire. Okay, Asian Ghetto.
Oh,
Asian
okay.
Ghetto. Okay, that's
I count that as campus. I think that's fine.
I think that's the scariest spot, but all right.
Yeah, I know, right? I was going to say that. Yeah, Shivam, you want to take it
just
over?
like a shooting last week or something. But yeah, never mind. Okay, Raghav. So what do you wish?
I see that answer. I think the most visited spot for me was, I think, Dwinelle. Was that the hall name?
Okay.
Yeah.
For some reason, even in my senior year, even when we didn't have classes, I would just find myself chilling there with friends because it was just so massive and so old, no one bothered to go there.
Yeah.
So, Raghav, what do you wish you could have told yourself when you were a student at Cal?
Oh, explore a lot more. I thought I was an explorer, but I only wish people told me to take less stress about the absolute major and explore a ton more. I think, being in the US for the first time and, you have to prove yourself and, studies matter, blah, blah, blah. All of those are true, but I think you can manage that, but you could do tons more exploration. So all the things I remember have nothing to do with my core classes. They have everything to do with everything else I did.
Yep.
Yeah, last question, I think very similar, but in hindsight, as a student, what would have you done differently? Apart from staying 2 miles away naturally.
I would have stayed further maybe.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I enjoyed I'll answer that, but I actually stayed with a large set of 10 people. So after first year of college, when we entered housing, I had the most fascinating experience in Berkeley and in San Francisco, where we were a group of 10 people and we stayed together, different majors, different nationalities, and that group continued forever. In fact, I think my name is still on a lease of a 5-bedroom house in San Francisco, rent control, yay. So I think that was very fascinating for me, and I enjoyed and cherished that. I think a lot of my happiness and stuff happened through that friend group and what all we did and just learnings and different majors and stuff. What I would have done differently, was that the question?
Yeah.
Was the question? Yeah. I actually graduated early. Sometimes I wonder, I wish I stayed a little longer and did a few more classes. I think after my second year, third year, I was pretty much done with all things important to graduate. And then because half my friends kind of graduated in 3 years, I was like, okay, well, I don't have anything to do here. I graduated early. I did a whole trip in India for about 2 months. But some part of me almost wants to go back and spend an extra semester and do the classes which I kind of never got to do. And, I took graduate classes in 3.5 years. I almost majored in economics. If only I had like the requirement classes done, I would have finished that off. I really want to do philosophy as well. I want to kind of do part major in philosophy. So I think part of me wants to kind of explore that in Cal. Decals, my absolute favorite thing. I was a big sucker for decals.
Yeah, decals are great.
Divyansh here teaches a decal himself.
I will try to invite you as a keynote speaker next semester. So we'll be in touch. I think we can, Shivam, if you don't have anything, we can move on to the audience Q&A.
Yeah, we are learning.
Yeah, we're
actually,
a little bit
answer
late.
one question from the audience first, from Anaya, and then I'll let you guys pick and choose and throw me questions. So she'd asked earlier, do you feel the app does not add any value to a major portion of the blue collar workers? So I'm going to take this question so I spend a lot of time explaining how value is more important. How you solve it is important, but that's a second question you need to figure out. And I almost kind of might have brushed the use of tech aside. That's actually not true. Here's how you guys want to look at tech as an industry. You have companies which sell technology, or maybe they'll sell data, which you could assume as technology, right? Amazon's AWS. They're in the business of infrastructure, technology infrastructure. Google, Facebook make money through selling and monetizing data, right? You might consider them as selling technology in some sense, right? These are not to be confused by companies who don't sell technology, but are extremely tech driven. Amazon is not in the business of selling technology. They're a retail company, they're a product e-commerce company, right? Just that unlike their peers, whom they have kind of left behind by eons, every technology is infused in every part of their operation, right? So urban company, we're in the business of creating delightful homes, solving for services, and as part of that also creating massive employment. Every part of how we do it is extremely tech driven. And I'll just throw one or two examples to make it super profound. If you had to open a salon in a city, you would take real estate, you would have a receptionist whose job is to say hi to customers, greet them, tell them what the salon services are about, schedule them a little bit, right? This job for us is primarily handled by our app and our booking engines, right? So we don't have anyone talking to customers. The app actually talks to customers, places the bookings and so on and so forth, right? Another heavy duty thing is just ensuring people reach on time, right? In fact, as students, you guys hardly reach on time, and it's very hard to enforce. How would anyone enforce you guys reaching on time? We do that, 30,000 touch points every day without any manual intervention. And our error rate needs to be like literally less than 1%. Right? 1% is far less than any human error. That only happens because of technology, because we're tracking where every partner is. We know very quickly if a partner is not going to reach on time. We can escalate, we can prompt him, we can tell the customers. So technology is that nervous system, and it's basically how we run the ship, right? But we're not in the business of selling technology. I don't know if that answers, Anayata, your question. So app adds a lot of value. At a very small scale, you could remove technology and do everything manually. You might come close to the excellence technology sets, but just simply does not work when you have to scale things.
Okay, we'll just skip follow-ups for now because we have audience questions coming in. Anvita, can you unmute Harry Dalal next? Harry, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, please go ahead and ask your question, please.
This is the first question I want to ask is can you please talk about your starting journey and how and when you turned from a tech major to an entrepreneur? How did that transition what made you an entrepreneur from a CS major?
Yeah, good question, Harry. I don't think there was an explicit time. I think there was an explicit moment where I had to change what I was doing. It took me 6 months to convince my parents. It hardly took me like a second to convince myself to move back to India. But I think for me, it was very inherent nature since childhood. I always, got inspired by the idea of just solving problems. And I just did not see myself solving meaningful problems enough in whatever I was doing in the Valley, right? And I like to joke about this. I don't know if you guys would get the Hindi Bollywood humor here, but in the Amitabh Bachchan generation of movies, Roti Kapda Makan was the 3 classic problems to live and die for, the 3 classic problems to solve. I think in our generation, that's evolved into employment, education, and healthcare, right? So it kind of always pulled me towards it. The question was just me rationalizing that it's okay to take certain kinds of risks, and kind of calling the cat on, there's certain career paths which, you should question everything is, I think, my end advice there. If you kind of have a good bar on questioning the right things about your lives, you're probably going to make good decisions you won't regret.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, that makes a lot of sense. Definitely things that, we can start applying right now. So that was a great answer. Yash, do you want to ask your question next? Anvita, can you unmute Yash Singh?
All right. Firstly, great event put up. I just want to say that I also studied in the States, in Texas, and I returned 2 months ago to India just to pursue entrepreneurship as well. So it's really inspiring to see you, Raghav. My question is, when you started your journey, you looked for co-founders or you found people you can work with. How is that process, and what has your experience been working with them?
Oh boy, that's like the toughest answer to give. But great question. I think it's a wonderful question. Um, I think there's no playbook. I spend a lot of time meeting folks, meeting friends, not with the purpose of actually finding co-founders. I was just so young, I didn't even understand what you need co-founders for. Buggi taught me you need a team. Um, you really can't create a company just by one man army, right? I just got super lucky, by the way. I got really lucky. I think my co-founders got really lucky that we had three people super passionate, having the same alignment on, I mean, not the 1 year, 1 year doesn't matter, having the same life alignment on like 20, 30 years ahead, what we wanted to do. Our take on wealth creation for ourselves, our take on the kind of problems we want to solve, and it kind of fueled there. I think there's certain tricks to enhance your chance of finding co-founders. You need to be fairly well networked. I actually struggled a lot. I was young, so I didn't have a very large professional network. I didn't have my college here, so I still probably have a larger, college network in the Valley. When I go to Valley, I have like tons of super senior folks across different countries to meet. In India, everything had to be set up in the last, X years. So networking is super important. A lot of networking will happen either by the places you worked at or through your college. So one thing I would have changed about my Berkeley experiences, I would have probably been much better at valuing relationships, not just super close friends, but just generally the whole community. I think that's one thing I was not very good at. So I think socializing, networking is important. It doesn't have to have a purpose. So that's one thing. But yeah, honestly, there's no science. People really, really have to get lucky. Even when you find, the right co-founder, the journey is not 1 year long. 5, 10 years, people change, priorities change. So you have to really have a large risk appetite to choose. I joke about it. This joke won't fly with you guys because none of you are married, but you spend more time with your co-founders than your spouse or your girlfriend, boyfriends. And unfortunately or fortunately, you don't have to, it's not just the one person, you might have like multiple co-founders. So, the complexities of relationships become even more intense. So I think that's it. Value co-founders don't do too much of science. It's more of an alignment of life goals than just an idea. Ideas actually change all the time. So yeah, Yash, I think that's, and Harry, to your previous question of tech and the shift to entrepreneur, I don't think those are disjoint things. Entrepreneurship, I think, just is a galvanized term. As a techie, I call BS on a lot of buzzwords. I think that's again one of those sort of buzzwords. You could be doing like, you could be a doctor and you would still be an entrepreneur if you're pushing certain frontier. I'm a techie at heart because everything I do, I have more infatuation towards just solving it through tech. So what do I do after work? I would be busy. I have a telescope. I'd be either like stargazing or I'd be looking at really geeky stuff. So I think tech is just how I enjoy doing things. Entrepreneurship is just the art of finding problems and solving it. It's not necessarily linked to, hey, have you created a business or not? So that's why my previous answer was a little more vague, but yeah.
No, Raghav, this is great. I think we've all learned so much, not only from the last, from the last hour, but also the last 5 minutes. I think it's just so much of value addition, as you say, right? And I think we've gone a little bit over the time limit. So I just want to take this, I just want to take a minute or so to thank you for, for coming to this event. We honestly didn't think that we could have someone like you come to our event and, talk to us so openly, so you know, and just give us all this incredible insight that, no matter where we are, we'll be able to apply it. So I just want to thank you from our team, and I also want to thank the audience that, came through at, it's like 10:30 in India, and anyone who joined in from the US would have joined in at 8 a.m., which is incredible dedication. So thank you a lot. And I also want to give a quick shout out to our outreach partner, STOA HQ, which is trying to build a 12-week sort of MBA bootcamp for the Indian, for the Indian ecosystem. So if they're here, shout out to you guys for, helping us push this through a bunch of channels. And, to end, Raghav, thank you so much. This was great. We've had a great past hour, and, I know like all of us on the team would love to stay in touch. So yeah, thank you so much.
Yep. Thanks guys for hosting this. And I think it's wonderful to be a student. So you guys should really cherish and enjoy these days. And I think do have fairly high ambition. I think you guys are or have had a fantastic education. And I think it's best put to use when you really start to question how the world operates and try to make it better. So don't fear, whatever you guys do, you guys will probably turn out to be fairly successful. So you might as well make that journey worthwhile. That's my single advice to all of you.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is great. We're definitely going to be putting up some really cool Instagram stories with all these quotes, and we'll definitely share them with you because I think these are quotes worth saving. Yeah, thank you so much. This was great, and have a good night.
Yeah. Happy to stay on for a few more question answers off recording, or either ways if you guys would be keen. Yeah, thanks a lot for hosting.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I think we can stay on for a question or two longer if you want. But you don't want to shut the recording, team?